Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you for today's lectures based on the theme of rights, representation, and community voices. I'm Malika Kukreja, and I will be coordinating the two lectures for today, which are a part of the ongoing certificate course on gender studies being organized by Forum for Democracy in collaboration with Department of Political Science and Internal Quality Assurance Cell, Mata Sundari College, University of Delhi. As human beings entitled to basic rights, the issue of rights of women and sexual minorities has been an important point of discussion in the national and international arena. For these groups to become aware of their rights and for fully exercising them, the issue of their representation and voice in the community is taken as a prerequisite. This representation not only involves the mere visibility of women in social, political, economic, and cultural spaces, but their active participation to raise concerns that relate to women and the sexual minority communities globally and also undermine their basic rights. Keeping this context in mind, our lectures today will be based on the theme of representation and rights from the perspective of gender, education, and global experiences by our two esteemed guests. The first part of this lecture will be delivered by our expert and well-informed resource person in the field of education, Dr. Aprajita Sharma, who will approach the theme of rights, representation, and community voices from the perspective of gender and education. I welcome you, ma'am. Dr. Aprajita Sharma is an advocate of right to education and is closely working with RTE Forum, the largest network on education in the country. Currently, she's assistant professor at the Council for Social Development, New Delhi, a premier research institute. Author of the book, Education for Peace, Building Possibilities Through Countering Hegemony, she's also written and spoken extensively on RTE, NEP, and issues of gender, equity, and quality in school education to influence policy and practice. She was nominated for the prestigious International Visitor Leadership Program for her work on education and skill development for children and youth, particularly girls from families working in the unorganized sector. She has also engaged in influencing policy at the South Asian level through her work with regional networks like Regional Forum for Safe and Secure Education and Women's Regional Network. A hearty welcome to you, ma'am, for chairing this lecture for our students today. Before I formally
Malika,
begin
can
with this,
we, sorry to interrupt you. We are already late, so we can just, students know the rule. We can start.
okay,
We can
sure, ma'am, sure, ma'am.
session. Yeah.
Thank you, Malika. Thank
Yes,
you
ma'am.
so much. And firstly, before I begin, I would like to thank Dr. Bharti again for this wonderful opportunity to interact with such a wonderful bunch of students that I've got to know from Dr. Bharti. So, and it is very interesting that, and thank you, the Forum for Democracy, for showing interest on a topic which is often talked about, but then not taken so seriously. So when we talk about education, gender is something that always, is not taken in depth the way it should be. So I think I'll take the opportunity to reinvigorate the narrative on education and gender. And as planned, I will deliver my lecture for 40 minutes at a stretch, and then take 20 minutes for question and answers. But since we are already 15 minutes late, you can always stop me wherever you feel I'm going a little fast or you're not being able to get me. So for any clarification, for anything, you can just raise your hand and then we can discuss there and then itself. Or otherwise, we keep 10 minutes to 15 minutes for discussion at the end of the lecture. Is that okay, Malika?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
That's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So, before I begin, I would like to give an outline of how the lecture will go. And if there is any input from from the participants that this particular thing should also be added, so that will be very useful for me as well. So I begin with the outline of the lecture, which will be basically first I'll talk about why education as a right. What do we mean by education as a right? And then explaining it a little bit, I go to why education and gender is important, and what is the the current scenario of right to education and gender in the country. After that, I also talk about why education is important when we're talking about gender and what do we mean by gender in education, and what is the context behind it for which we need to understand education and gender. And then I go on to the different levels of education and look at gender and education in each of it, and then coming to some of the challenges that we face, and keeping the challenges in mind, what are the policy that's available in the country briefly, and then the way forward. So this will basically be the outline of the lecture. So is it okay for all? And if you want something else to be added, then we can maybe add after the lecture is done, or in between, if any question or anything that you want to add or any clarification is also welcome. So is it okay to all?
Students, please respond.
Mom.
Okay. So when we say right to education, what do we mean by it? What is a right? So and then this is also part of the larger session today on representation, rights, and community voices. So sorry. So when I say education as a right, education as an entitlement, it basically means that education is equal for all. Equal for all. And two things that needs to be marked here is that it is equal and it is universal. So when we say that education is it should be equally available to all. So and then the second question that comes is, what is basically do we understand by education? So when we say equality and when we say universal, education also implies two important values that we need to understand. One is the intrinsic value of education, and one is the instrumental value that comes from the capability approach given by Dresden-Sen in 1999, which basically talks about education as something which serves two purposes. One, the self, the personal development of an individual, of a student, and second, the collective and the non-economic and the collective role that education plays, both for the individual and the society at large. So when we talk about the personal the personal benefits that education has, the intrinsic value of education, it talks about basically the the earning capacity, the development of the individual as someone, as a social being, as someone who can earn, as someone who is contributing to the labor market. And then at the same time, when we talk about the collective nature of education, that is the instrumental value of education, is that the role of the individual as in a collective to form a society, to work in a group, to think about collective benefits, to think about also non-economic benefits, so that both comprises of a society which is equal and which is progressive. So in this context, it is very important to understand both the values of education. Because if we consider both the values of education, then it only qualifies as education as a right and education as an entitlement. When we say that education has both these purposes, it turns into a public good. So what do we understand by a public good? A public good is something, sorry, where everyone has the equal opportunity to exercise their intrinsic and instrumental values, the personal and the collective values. So when education is seen from this perspective, it does become a human right and doesn't become a public good, which is wherein the role of the state is primordial. The role of the state is primary, because when we are saying that it is applicable to all, to everyone equally and of equal quality, then we are saying that it is provided. It is publicly provisioned. It is provided by the state. So when we say state, it can be the state government, it can be the central government, but then the role of the state is primary. Second, third important aspect that we need to understand when we're saying what education as a right is that it is no longer a privilege, it is a human right. So like education was practiced, if you look at before the Constitution of India came in 1950, before the Constitution of India came in India, was formulated in India, so education was only restricted to a particular section of the society. So it was a privilege for a particular society. It was not applicable for all. So hence it was not a right. So the moment we talk about education as an entitlement, education as a right, education as an empowering tool, sorry, it becomes education becomes a human right. And these are some of the aspects that we really need to understand when we're talking about right to education. What is the status of right to education in the country? When I'm saying this, this is something that I've been working for almost more than a decade now, is the Right to Education Act 2009, which came about in 2009 based on the constitutional amendment which took place in 2002, and where the Supreme Court of India linked the right to education to right to life. It said that right to education is as important as right to life. So Article 21 is of the Constitution talks about right to life, and then when it came to when the Supreme Court judgment came about with the 86th Amendment of the Constitution, it got merged with Article 21 because it said that right to education is as important as right to life. So if you're living, you should have the right to education. All should have the right to education. I'm emphasizing the word here, all. So, so what does the Article 21A, which came in 2002, says? It says, the state shall provide free and compulsory education to all children of the age of 6 to 14 years in such a manner as the state may by law determine. So what's important in this statement is the state is the role of the state is primary. It's the role of the state to provide free is no cost, free of cost, and compulsory education means for all children. So one limitation which we see in this statement is that it remained restricted to only age of 6 to 14 years. And but then even elementary education being a right, being a fundamental right in the country, has seen 100 years of struggle. When the first bill for right to free and compulsory education was placed in the Legislative Assembly in 1911, the main opposition to it was, how will the homes run if the girls go to study? Who will work in the fields and in the factory if all boys go to study? So it was not universal. The very idea of universalization of education, the very idea of equal education for all, the very idea of education as a right doesn't have a very old history in India. So when we're talking about all children, when you're talking about education as a right, here it is very important to understand gender, because this is a course on gender and you must be studying all throughout this 10 days today. Today is the 11th day. How the social construction of gender and how the male and female being categorized and ascribed with, gender roles impacts a person's life. And it doesn't only impact a girl's life, it also impacts a boy's life. It impacts both the gender lives, all the gender lives, in fact. Why to say both? So there where girls' education was given importance when the narrative of gender came in, and then a lot of gap was seen that girls particularly, we have started talking about the third gender only very recently, that girls are really not there in education. And that is one of the reasons why you know, why we see a lot of gender-based violence. We see that voices of uh, women's voices and voices of girls are not represented as per the number of women in the. It constitutes more than almost 50% of the population. But when it comes to voice, when it comes to representation, it's not reflective of the number. So so gradually it was seen that when we're talking about education as a right, it talks about all education for all, equal education for all. And therein comes that it is very, very important to understand where are the girls in education. Because what happens if girls are not there in education, if girls are not participating in education, that they are deprived of the right of their basic entitlement. We studied right now that what is education is a right, is the basic entitlement. State should provide education to all. So if girls are not there equally as boys, so that means that they are deprived. Their instrumental and their intrinsic values is not, they are not getting the opportunity to actually express and utilize both the intrinsic and the instrumental values in their lives, which is a major, major concern. Second, education is sure way of giving them much greater power, of enabling them to make genuine choices. Now, how will girls make choices? And we even now see that the moment they make a small choice, even to find the love in the life, I mean, it's talked about as love jihad. So, so how do women make the choices in their lives? So one basic way is through education. Third, how will the girls get the skills and the information and the self-confidence to be a better worker, a citizen, a parent? It is through education. Education does transform lives of children, of girls, gives them a safer and a better nourished, or even the ideas of a safer, of a better nourished, of a better society, or for her both productive and reproductive life. And most importantly, what gives her the leadership? Why is there a lack of representation as compared to the number, a lack of voice, women's voice as compared to the number? It is the lack of leadership, and education actually plays a major, major role in giving that leadership role in her community and also in the society at large. So it is education and gender is integrally related. And if you really have to talk about women empowerment, we have to begin, or along with others, we also have to talk about gender and education. We have to talk about the gaps. We have to talk about how to not deprive her of leadership, not deprive her of a better nourishment, a better society, better skills, better information, because that will only come through education. So why do we see that? What kept her away from education for all these years? Even though we see a better gender parity index now, gender parity index is where we see the participation of girls and boys in education. So the gender parity index in elementary education, if we say, has improved over the years. So what is the context that kept her away? And the context you must have been studying in this short course of this last 9-10 days, that entrenched patriarchy, poverty, deep-rooted gender bias has led to separate gender roles, which has always kept her in the private precincts of our home, of her family, and then has not made the public spaces gender sensitive, has not opened the public spaces for women, has not made the public spaces safe for girls. As a result of which it acts as a major, major barrier in education for girls. And this is when these are normal situations. And when it gets dovetailed, when situations like a pandemic or a disaster or a displacement, internal displacement, internal migration happens, then it is again women who are differentially impacted. And what happens as a result of it? girls are pushed out of school and there are research to actually substantiate such evidence. So the public spaces, including the school, if looked at as a social site, as a public space where children from all sections of the society come together to learn, to relearn, to relearn, and grow as individuals to do better for themselves and for the society. We see that girls, even today, there are different barriers, and the barriers are multiple. Firstly, the barriers are at the family level, the barriers are at the community level, at the school level, system level, and also the structural barriers, which still rules the mindset and then keeps children, girls away from school. And even if they are in the school, the purpose of schooling for girls becomes different. Mostly we see that when we talk about girls' education is primarily for them to work till before they are married, and then after marriage, so if the family allows, they go out and marry. So public spaces are restrained, public spaces are gendered, and we see this in different forms even today. But then things are changing. Some of the critical statistics on girls' education is important to understand when we are talking about gender and education, even in the 21st century. More girls out of school are out of school. Even in India, more girls, almost 3.2%, and 3.2% is a huge number, are out of school than boys, even today, in the cohort of children below 15 years. Why this statistic is important is because below 15 years, education is a fundamental right. Education is justiciable. If it is not there in the lives of the girls, if it's not there in the lives of all children, you can approach the courts. It is justiciable. It is a fundamental right. Despite that, we see that 3.2% of the girls in India are, and this is a huge number, it's like more than a crore, more than 1.5 crore actually. So why is that so? So these are things to actually think about. Less number of girls in secondary and higher secondary schools. So we see that there are a lot many girls who are not there at the elementary level. Then we see that less number of girls compared to boys are again in the secondary and higher secondary schools. At least 2 million girls in India remain out of school. NCPCR, that's the National Commission, National Commission for Protection of Child Rights 2018, suggests that approximately 40% girls between 15 to 18 years of age are out of school. So 40% is a big number. 57% of girls drop out upon reaching the 11th grade. Distance to school act as a significant roadblock. I'll be talking about the distance norms when I'll be talking a little about the RT Act 2009. For every 100 elementary schools in rural India, there were only 14 offering secondary and only 6 offering high secondary grade classes. And herein, the number of schools and the distance from the home to the school for girls' education is very, very critical, because when we are talking about the entrenched patriarchy and poverty, which impacts, I did not go into the details, but then the public spaces, the distance, matters a lot when it comes to girls' education. Female literacy is also low in some states than the national average, and education of girls from SC, ST, and Muslim communities are doubly jeopardized. And we see that in terms of enrollment as well as transition rate. We see that enrollment is 19.3% at the elementary level when it comes to SC girls, and when it goes to secondary level, it becomes 18.6, lower by 1.3%, and when it goes to higher secondary level, it again goes lower. Similarly, it is in the case of ST girls. In higher and tertiary education, the participation of boys and girls is drastic, because it's only 44.4% girls who have completed till class 10. This is the latest NSS. So data on 17, 18, the humanities 47%, science 38.5%. So, and then it is actually drastic when it comes to science education and girls. It's only 38.5% compared to 61.5% for boys, which is almost double. And vocational and technical education, it's more than 95. If we look into the percentage distribution of persons of age 15 to 59 years, by status of vocational and technical training, it is more than 95% women did not receive any vocational and technical education. So these gaps are not because of the gray matter. These gaps primarily exist because of the social, which you must have studied, gender as a social construct. Gender, the social roles, the social norms, the gender norms that women have been playing in this society, and not only in Indian society, across the globe. So that play a major role in for these gaps which exist in education. And that is why it's very important to look at gender when we're talking about education. And not only the gaps in education, the other social challenges which a girl faces, like child marriage, still exist in the country. States like Bihar, 39% of girls get married before have married before the right age. That's 18 for girls. Rajasthan, West Bengal, UP. Similarly, despite a significant decline in child labor, we see in states like Bihar, UP, the number of children and also girls in child labor, in homework, in sibling care, is much more than the national average. So, and at the same time, the safety part of it, I mean, with girls and public spaces that I've been talking about, girls in education, school, girls in different institutions, colleges, girls in workplace, public spaces, girls raising their voice. The NCRB, the National Commission Crimes Bureau in India, talks about 1.5 lakh girls went missing from 2016 to 2018. So crime against women, gender-based violence, women's representation in public spaces shrinking, women's leadership, women's voices are integrally related to, and also there is evidence when we're talking about it. And we're talking about it in the 21st century. And the COVID-19 has altogether brought about newer challenges. Because when we talk about access to schools, we have been talking about it from last how many years? Maybe 70 years after independence, we have been talking about access. So the COVID-19 induced challenges have to also started talking about girls' access to technology, girls' access to internet, girls' access to an Android phone has been so I would rather say brutal, that girls have committed suicide because they do not have a phone, because they're not being able to follow the lessons. There is no internet connection sometimes, and sometimes they do not have a digital device, and as a result of which the social pressures on girls always remain. Either it's child marriage, or you're trafficked, or you're trafficked for work, or trafficked for sex, and also child labor. You're being pushed to domestic work, you're pushed to being a domestic help if you're in the urban areas, and then you're pushed out of school as a result of it. So access, when it has the definition of access have changed in today's terms, and the more we're talking about online education, we'll also have to see the challenges that it poses as for children, marginalized children, and especially for girls, and especially for girls belonging to marginalized families and communities, which have been historically marginalized, ST, Muslims in India. So, and of course, OBCs and other social groups as well. But then the forms of challenges for girls in education has been changing, and so we'll have to really and on top of it, um, uh, access to school was something that girls um, uh, could, after a lot of struggle, achieved, actually, I would rather say. But then the reverse is happening. A lot of government schools, you must have seen, and also have been closed down because of lack of resources, the government says, because of uh, efficiency, because of many reasons that the government state, because of rationalization, they say the schools are not performing, etc. So schools are getting closed down. So in COVID times, in regions where schools are not there, in the neighborhood, and then there are no digital devices, teachers are not around, there's no the ecosystem which should be there for education, of for anyone, for anybody, be it a boy or a girl, is completely missing. In such circumstances, it is very difficult for a child, especially for a girl, to continue her education. So these are very, very difficult times, and this pandemic has actually posed newer gender questions, um, which we really need to be seriously looking at, also at the policy level. And interestingly, our new education policy came during the pandemic. July 29th, we have the new education policy, and unfortunately, none of these challenges were addressed in the new education policy. So when I'll be talking about the policies, I'll be talking a little about it, where wherein voices from girls and voices for from women is very, very important, so that these nuances which and these newer challenges are raised, and with case studies wherein and media has been actually covering the case studies wherein girls have been uh, adversely impacted to an extent that girls have committed suicide because of lack of access to digital device, because of lack of internet, because there are no schools around. So the fear, and the Supreme Court long back in 2002 talked about the importance of education is as important as right to life. So when you're deprived of education, it actually means that you're deprived of your life, the basic necessity for life. So so when I'm saying that education is very, very important, and so is there any evidence? And there is a lot of evidence which says that education actually empowers women. So firstly, girls' education and the reduction of the gender gap promotes democracy. So we all know we are in a phase where democracy is passing through a very, very difficult phase. And the Bihar election was just yesterday. So girls' education, and if there is a reduction, if the gender parity index, if there is gender parity in education, then it does promote democracy. Women who have been to school are more able to resist violence and abuse. And we know about gender-based violence. You must have also discussed, seen in the schedule, the gender-based violence, the abuses at workplace, at home, at family level. So women are able to resist if they've been attending school. Third, girls' education is the best investment, it says, as it not only empowers women and girls, but also leads to the prevention of early marriages and early pregnancies. Education narrows pay gaps between men and women, and educated women are more likely to find work. Earnings increase by approximately 10% for each additional year of schooling. Sorry. Education not only helps to grow the economy, but also fights poverty. Increasing the share of girls completing secondary education by 1% increases economic growth by 0.3%. Eliminating the gender gap could boost GDP by 27% in India. Boost GDP by 27% in India. So definitely education leaves a very, very important mark in the lives of girls. And therefore, it is extremely important to look at education from the gender perspective and understand the gender nuances and uh, work towards it. So what does the policy says about girls in education in the country? So I'll talk briefly about the Right to Education Act 2009, which talked about free and compulsory education based on the 2002 amendment, which I mentioned previously. It was based on a normative framework. So the first Education Commission talked about a normative framework for quality education for all, equal quality education for all, and based on universalization. So when I'm saying universalization, education has to be a right. The role of the state is primary. It is justiciable, and then it is equally applicable for all, and it is of a equal character. The quality of education is equal for all. So for that, it talked about a normative framework and what were the norms that were universal for quality and universal for quality education was a pupil teacher ratio. So we see in Indian classrooms, we used to see in Indian classrooms, even we see in today's world, especially in public education system, that it's a large, huge class with one teacher. So the norm, and it is very difficult when it's basically at the elementary level to teach a huge class and when there's just a single teacher. So it made norms for pupil teacher. It did talk about a pupil teacher ratio. It talked about a decent building. It talked about number of working days, instructional hours. It talked about teaching, learning equipment. It talked about libraries. It talked about play materials, games, sports equipments, etc., etc. Just to explain it, that it talked about a, a framework which is there in all schools equally. And these were based on the minimum necessities, minimum necessities, which is very, very crucial for quality education. So what was there in the Act? Primarily, all children were conferred the right to free and compulsory education. The state, the state assumed legal responsibility to ensure implementing a set of norms which was established for ensuring quality and equity, quality and equality in the school system. A holistic approach was adopted for universalizing a segment of school education in the country. Again, for the first time, a new timeline was stipulated for achieving universal of quality elementary education. The Act recognized free and compulsory education for 3 to 18 years as a public good, and as the state is obliged to commit resources for its implementation. The public provisioning we talked about, the role of the state we talked about. The above provisions also challenged the barriers which women and girls faced in accessing equal education like their male counterpart. RTE was summarized in a 4A scheme, which enabled availability, accessibility, acceptability, and adaptability for all children, including girls. So this was what the what was there in RTE Act. But after 10 years of RTE today in 2020, we have crossed 10 years of RTE. And even then, only 12.7% schools have become RTE compliant. So when we say RTE compliant, we mean that only out of 100, if we compare it if we just see what is 12.7%, it's like in every 100 schools, only 12 schools have all these facilities of where does comply to the norms that RTE Act 2009 talked about. So we can see the situation. And that is why COVID-19 actually impacted school education adversely, because our schools were not ready for quality education pre-COVID. And post-COVID, it requires certain important infrastructure without which the schools cannot be opened safely for children and especially for girls. So we do not have the infrastructure in our public education system, the adequate infrastructure. We did not have it pre-COVID. It was not taken seriously at the policy level, and it was not implemented. In the last 10 years, there was a lot of opportunity to implement the act in letter and spirit, but we see that there has been a lot of lapses. And the new education policy, which came in July 29 of this year, 2020, amidst the pandemic, does not see education as an empowering tool. When I say for girls, when I say this, I want to emphasize that it doesn't the new education policy, the national education policy, doesn't look at girls' education in the policy as gender responsive and as a public good. Now, when education is not a public good, when education is not universal, when education is not, where the role of the state is not a primary, it is very, very difficult to bring an universal form of education, because the moment it is not universal, our girls will always suffer, because it has been seen at various at multiple times that girls are sent to government schools and boys are sent to private schools. So that division, and why is that so? It's because there is a fee attached to the private school. So we have to understand the gender nuances when we are talking about education, and when we are actually formulating education for the country, and when we are formulating education structure system for the country, and we're not talking about the girls, we cannot call it a gender responsive education policy. So the most difficult thing, which is not palatable when we're talking about education and gender, which is there in the new education policy, is that girls are clubbed into a group called socio-economic disadvantaged groups, SEDGs. So when we are talking about girls' education, and we fail to actually look at the historical structural barriers that prevent girls' education, and we're clubbing them into a group, or into a homogeneous group, into a group wherein we are also talking about children from SC, ST, Muslims, and other disadvantaged groups, then it is very, very difficult to actually understand, or even understand gender, first of all, and then actually make a gender responsive policy. And the moment we do not talk about universalization, and we start talking about target oriented approach, bicycles, de do, ye de do, wo de do. So when we're not talking about universalization, and unfortunately, the national education policy oversees that, and fails to look education, or fails to reinforce education as an empowering tool for women. The budgets has always been low for education, which is another reason why there are no adequate schools, secondary schools for girls. There are no adequate, even primary schools. Schools are being closed down in the name of proper utilization of resources, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, there is no regulation of private schools. So the government fails to give the proper budgets, the government fails to regulate private schools. And in the new national education policy, which is seen is that it talks about more private schools, it talks about public schools and private schools as partners and in the same plane. And the moment we do that, we know who will be the losers. And so who will be losing out in the game. So it is a very, very critical time for girls' education in the country. So what is required as something that we really need to raise a voice wherever we are working on education and gender is there is a very important need, a very critical need for a gender responsive education policy, where gender is not on a single, a singled out as a singled out as a fund for girls' education, bicycles for girls' education, But gender should be cross-cutting. At every aspect of education policy, there should be gender. The target-oriented approach has been damaging for girls' education and will continue to damage girls' education in the future. So what is required is universalization of education, reiteration of universalization of education at all levels of education, primary, secondary, higher secondary, and higher education, tertiary education, technical education. Universalization should be the norm. There should be increasing budgets as percentage of GDP and not philanthropic funding. And third, policy for regulation of private schools. With this, I would like to stop here for today. and take questions or clarifications.
Thank you, ma'am, for this informative lecture, and we'll take the questions from the students one by one now.
Yeah.
Pragya,
Yes.
you've raised your hand. Can you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Good evening, ma'am.
Good
Ma'am,
evening.
my question is universal education and universalization of education is only related to girls and boys, or it should rather include transgenders as well? Like we know that
It
if an act for girls is made, so it has done
yes,
some sort of improvement. There is no such
right.
act for transgender, which is somewhere lagging, I
Yes.
guess.
Yes, yes,
Thank
yes,
you, ma'am.
absolutely. I mean, my lecture was basically, I did not talk much about the transgender, but yes, when we are talking about universalization, it includes everyone. And we have a normative framework which is applicable to all children. So, transgender, definitely, yes.
Anybody else? If you have any questions, students, you can ask your questions.
Ma'am, I
Um,
have one more question, if you
yes,
Yes,
allow.
Pragya.
yes,
Yes, Pragya,
Uh,
please.
Ma'am, like you said that we after the sorry, that the Act Right to Education Act, ma'am,
yes,
we government is done with their effort. Whatever they could do, just like free
okay.
and compulsory education, they are done on their part. But ma'am, still there is some sort of problem lagging on societal norms. Why
Hmm.
is still that there after 10 years of RT that problem we are facing, and we are discussing right to education for girls primarily? Like
Right,
this should not be there anymore. No, 10 years is a
right, right.
huge time span. So ma'am, what is the problem?
Absolutely. See, the problems, challenges are multiple. One is, uh, see, the role of the state is not only policy formulation. One of the important aspect is also implementation. So there has been, I would not say it's only the responsibility of the state. It is definitely responsibility of all stakeholders, of everyone who has a stake in the education system, parents, children, everyone, community, so on and so forth. But then the RT Act, the implementation of RT Act was very, very poor on part of the state. So since it was a central act, so the center's role was primary, and then of course the state also had its share. But then what we see that at the the initial years till 2013, 2013, 2014, 2012, 2013 maybe, things were improving and it did move fast. But then after a time, there was, a major lapse in the implementation of the act. And in 10 years, it is only 12.7% RT compliant that we see. And other reason is also, see, along with education, there was another scheme which was launched for girls' education, that is Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao at the same time, So when we keep, uh, when we do not integrate schemes and programs, and when we do not integrate, and when we do not implement laws, so and we do not give the budget, I mean, it is the responsibility of the state to, that's public provisioning that we talk about. It's the responsibility of the state to provide the budgets, or even ensure proper expenditure of the budget. So if these are not taken care of, so only formulating a law doesn't help. And secondly, I would rather say that wherever there has been proper implementation, there has been improvement. Like you said, that yes, girls have improved to an extent. And why did that happen? It because of the role of the role the state played, and also, of course, parents and children themselves. But then the role of the state is very, very important. So wherever the state was proactive, wherever there was uh, proper budgets, wherever there was timely implementation, things moved, and things have moved over the last 70 years. So, but then the sudden lapse and the poor implementation, wherever there has been poor implementation, we see that uh, the gaps the gaps are glaring, and at some points the gaps are actually very glaring, and especially secondary education. Like for an example, there was one provision in RT Act on no detention policy. So it was very debatable. But then I when I was working, I even now, I was very much pro no detention policy, because the children who come from marginalized backgrounds, especially girls, they need some time in the school to actually catch up. So this no detention policy actually help them stay in the school. And when you're in the school, you are safer than at home. And then at the same time, you also are interacting with different children from different social groups. And at the same, so you learn to also mingle and interact and converse with other, with children, with students, with your peer from other social groups. So that is very important for the growth of all children and also for the society. So, but then there was a lot of debate, and that got changed. And now there are exams happening at class 3, class 5, and class 8 level again. And that was also been brought back by the National Education Policy, which came in July this year. So, and if I tell you the real reason behind it, it is because of the lack of infrastructure that we have in regarding secondary schools. The moment we pass class 8, and it's a no detention policy, so you all children pass, we do not have adequate schools at the 9th and the 10th level. So these are all very policy related decisions that need to be made at the right time. So a single cycle of 8 years of uninterrupted education for all children was not allowed in the country, because we did not have the adequate infrastructure. If all children pass class 8, we do not have the adequate schools in class 9 standard. So these are policy gaps, and we really need to identify these gaps, and at the same time bring in evidence from the ground. Because the more we work in the ground, we see that girls generally drop out at the secondary level. Transition from elementary to secondary is quite low. So why that happens? Are there schools nearby? Are the schools very far? Are there female teachers in the school? You should ask certain questions which are very critical for girls' education. Are there girls' toilets in the school? Are there separate toilets in the school? Is the road from the home to the school safe? Or are there gangs of boys or men at several places which actually eat these girls? So, which is not safe for them? Or there are other certain forms of, hidden violence which girls feel unsafe, as a result of which she refuses to go to school. So, there are certain questions which needed to be asked. And when I see gender responsive policy, and when I say gender should be cross-cutting, these are the questions that need to be asked, and also the curriculum. I did not go into it today, but then we also need to look at the curriculum, which talks about which at certain junctures, which is very gendered. So once you're in the adolescent phase, you do not like gendered, atmosphere, environment. You start questioning it. You start rebelling. Or is this the reason that you don't feel like going to school? So gender nuances is something that we really need to look at seriously when we are saying that even in the 21st century, even after 10 years of RT, why is this so? So I also do not have ready-made tailor-cut answers, but these are some of the analysis that we have been struggling with, and even we continue struggling, and we keep asking questions, and it's very important to ask questions. Yes, I think
thank you.
This is
Thank you so much, ma'am, for engaging with these concerns. We have some more questions from the students, but I request the students to mail their questions to us. We'll definitely get back to you with the answers, as we already have our next resource person waiting for the lecture. Thank you so much, ma'am, for the informative lecture and for engaging with our students today. we're honored to have you
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much, Aprajita ma'am. It was really great and informative session, and we look forward to have you for more our session on right to education. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Bharti. Thank you, everyone. It was lovely. Thank you.
Thanks, ma'am.